You're still mine." Dante Valenti's voice cut through the crowded charity ballroom like a blade. Isabella didn't turn around. She kept her hand in Lucas's, her fingers steady, her heartbeat controlled the way a woman learns to control herself after 7 years of waiting for a man who never came. "Dante." Her voice was flat. "You signed the papers this morning." "I signed a document," he said. "I didn't sign away what's mine." That was the moment Isabella finally turned to face him, and smiled. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe to our channel and follow Isabella's journey all the way to the end, and drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story has traveled. The divorce appointment was scheduled for 9 in the morning. Isabella Romano arrived 7 minutes early. She sat in the lobby of Hartwell and Associates, one of the most prestigious law firms in the city. Her hands folded in her lap, her posture exact, her expression composed. She wore a cream-colored blouse she had chosen the night before with deliberate care. Not because she wanted to look beautiful, not because she wanted Dante to regret anything, but because she had promised herself that on this particular morning she would look like exactly what she was becoming, a woman stepping into her own life. The receptionist offered her coffee. She accepted it. She held the cup with both hands and stared at nothing, and let the warmth seep into her palms and thought, "This is the last morning I will ever have to wait for Dante Valenti." She had spent 7 years waiting for him, waiting for dinner to start because he was running late from a meeting he couldn't name, waiting for him to come home from trips he couldn't explain, waiting for the moment he would look at her, really look at her, and see that she was still standing there, still choosing him, still loving him with every tired and exhausted corner of her heart. She was done waiting. The elevator opened at 9:03 and Dante walked out. Isabella had prepared herself for this moment. She had rehearsed it in her bathroom mirror for 3 consecutive nights. She had expected to feel the familiar tightening in her chest, the pull that his presence always created in her, the complicated gravity of loving someone who never fully let you in. She felt none of it. She watched him cross the lobby, tall, measured, controlled, and she felt the way you feel when you look at a place you used to call home and realize the address no longer belongs to you. Not grief exactly, not relief exactly. Something quieter and more final than either of those things. Dante reached the seating area and stopped. He looked at her. "Isabella." "Dante." That was the entire greeting. 7 years of marriage, reduced to a single exchange of names, like strangers, confirming they had arrived at the right destination. He sat across from her. He was wearing a charcoal suit, no tie the collar of his shirt, open exactly one button. She had bought him that suit. She remembered standing in the store while the tailor measured his shoulders and thinking that she would grow old, watching this man become more powerful, more contained, more unreachable, and that she would love him through every year of it. She had been wrong about the last part. "You look well," Dante said. "I am well," she answered. Something moved across his face. She couldn't name it and didn't try. The attorney appeared brisk and professional and guided them into the conference room, and within 40 minutes, it was finished. 40 minutes to formally close 7 years. The papers crossed the table. Dante signed without reading them. She noticed that the way he signed without a single hesitation, without reviewing a single clause, as though the document was beneath his attention. As though she was beneath his attention. Some things never change, she thought, and picked up the pen. Her hand did not shake. She signed her name for the last time as Isabella Valenti. And then she set the pen down, and she stood, and she looked at the man she had loved across the conference table. "I hope you find what you were looking for," she said. She didn't wait for his response. She walked out. What Isabella did not know, what she could not have known, was that Dante sat in that conference room for 11 additional minutes after she left. His attorney said nothing. The paralegal gathered the documents in silence. The assistant refilled the water glasses no one had touched. Dante sat with his hands flat on the table and stared at the place where Isabella had been sitting. He had made a decision. He had told himself it was the right one. He had spent months convincing himself that releasing Isabella from his world was an act of protection, not abandonment. That letting her go was the kindest thing a man like him could give a woman like her. That she would be safer, freer, better without the shadow of everything he carried. He had been so certain. Sitting in that empty conference room, with the echo of her heels still fading in the hallway outside, Dante Valenti felt the first crack in that certainty. It was small, it was quiet, but it was there. He picked up his phone and called his driver and said, "The Whitmore event tonight. Make sure I'm there by 8. Then he stood up, buttoned his jacket, and walked out of the room, like a man who had not just made the greatest mistake of his life. The Whitmore Charity Gala was the kind of event that required 3 weeks of reservation and a minimum donation of $50,000 just to get through the door. Isabella had not planned to attend. She had received the invitation 3 weeks earlier before everything was finalized, and she had assumed she would give it away or simply not respond. But her friend Claire, who had been pulling her out of her own head for the past 4 months, with the gentle ruthlessness of a woman who loved her, had called 2 days ago and said, "You are going. You bought a dress last month that is too beautiful to stay in a garment bag. You are going." So Isabella went. She wore the dress navy blue simple cut in a way that made her feel like herself, rather than like an accessory to someone else's status. She wore the single pearl earrings her grandmother had left her. She wore her hair down. She wore no rings. She arrived at 7:45 and stood at the edge of the cocktail reception and accepted a glass of champagne and spent a few minutes thinking that the room was beautiful in the way expensive rooms always were, which was completely and totally disconnected from anything real. Then a voice beside her said, "You look like someone who's deciding whether this was a mistake." She turned. The man standing next to her was tall, dark-haired, with the easy posture of someone who was comfortable taking up space without needing to fill it with noise. He was holding sparkling water instead of champagne. His jacket was well made but not ostentatious. His eyes were direct. "Lucas Bennett," he said, extending his hand. "Isabella Romano," she said, and used her maiden name for the first time in 7 years and felt the word fit differently in her mouth, like something she had forgotten the shape of. "The charity work," Lucas said. "You're involved with the Haven Project." She raised her eyebrows. "You know the Haven Project. I designed their second facility." He said it simply without performance. "The one on Calloway Street. They needed more natural light in the common areas. I spent 3 weeks fighting with the building committee about window placement." He paused. "I won." Isabella laughed. It surprised her, the laugh. It came from somewhere genuine, somewhere she had not accessed in a long time, and for a moment she almost put her hand over her mouth to stop it, the way she used to when she was married, because Dante had always looked at her strangely when she laughed too freely in public, as though her joy was a liability he needed to manage. She did not cover her mouth. She let herself laugh and stood with her champagne in her hand and talked to Lucas Bennett about architecture and light and the practical problems of designing spaces where broken people needed to feel safe. And she felt for the first time in a long time like a person having a conversation rather than a fixture completing a room. They had been talking for 40 minutes when Lucas said, "I don't usually say this within an hour of meeting someone, but I find you genuinely interesting. Would you like to find somewhere less crowded?" Isabella glanced around the room. It was filling up now, the social machinery of the gala, clicking into motion, clusters of wealthy people performing the specific choreography of charity events, introductions and compliments and carefully calibrated displays of generosity. "Yes," she said, "I would." They moved toward the terrace, passing through the crowd, and in the shifting geometry of the room, Isabella did not see the man who had arrived at precisely 8 o'clock and was now standing near the entrance, scanning the room with the focused attention of someone who didn't need to search very hard to find what they were looking for. Dante found her in under 30 seconds. She was moving through the crowd in that navy blue dress, laughing again at something the man beside her had said, and the sight of it stopped Dante mid-step, as though someone had removed the floor beneath him. He had seen Isabella at hundreds of events over 7 years. He had seen her at dinners and galas and business functions and private parties. He had watched her work every room they entered, gracious and composed, playing her role perfectly. He had been proud of her in the abstract way that powerful men are proud of their wives as an extension of their own success, a reflection of their status. He had never once looked at her the way he was looking at her now, like she was a person he didn't know, like she was someone who existed entirely outside of him, like she was free. His jaw tightened. "Mr. Valenti." His associate Reyes appeared at his elbow. "The foundation director is waiting to speak with you about the not now," Dante said quietly. He watched Isabella and the man with her reach the edge of the terrace doors. The man said something. Isabella turned to face him, and her expression was open, unguarded. An expression Dante realized he had not seen on her face in years, maybe longer. Then, with the naturalness of two people who had found an unexpected ease with each other, "Lucas." Bennett reached out and took Isabella's hand, and Isabella let him. Every muscle in Dante's body went rigid. He stood in the middle of the most powerful charity gala in the city, surrounded by politicians and executives, and people who feared his name, and he could not move, could not breathe, could barely process the simple act he was watching a man taking the hand of a woman who used to be his wife. Used to be. The words tasted wrong. He was already moving through the crowd before he made the conscious decision to do it, shouldering past people with the contained authority of a man who had never in his life been told to wait, and as he pushed through the terrace doors, he saw them. Isabella and Lucas standing together in the cooler air, facing each other. And Lucas said something low and private, and Isabella's eyes softened, and she kissed him. It was not a dramatic kiss. It was not a performance. It was the simple, certain kiss of two people standing at the beginning of something real, and it lasted only a moment, and when it ended, Isabella's eyes were still closed for a half-second longer. "You're still mine." The words left Dante's mouth before he knew he had spoken them. Isabella's eyes opened. She turned. And for a moment, just a moment, there was something in her face that might have been pain or grief or the remnant of years of loving him. Then it closed over, the way a door closes quietly, and with finality. "Dante." Her voice was steady. "You signed the papers this morning." "I signed a document," he said. "I didn't sign away what's mine." Lucas had gone very still beside her. He was watching Dante with the careful assessment of a man who was not afraid, but was also not foolish. Isabella took one step forward. "Say that again," she said softly. "What's yours?" The word sat in the air between them, and Dante heard it for the first time, really heard it the way it sounded coming from him. And he saw in Isabella's eyes the reflection of every time he had used that word in exactly that way, as though she were a possession he had acquired rather than a person he had chosen. "Isabella, we are divorced," she said, each word precise and unhurried. "As of this morning, I am not your anything. I am not your wife. I am not your property. I am not your responsibility." She paused. "I am not yours." Lucas placed his hand lightly on the small of her back, not possessively, not theatrically, just present. Steady. Dante watched that hand. Something tore in him that he could not name and refused to acknowledge. "You don't know this man," he said. "I know him better after 2 hours than I knew you after 2 years." Isabella answered. The words hit him the way she had intended them to, not as cruelty, but as honesty, stripped of softness, offered plainly. Lucas spoke for the first time. "I think you should leave." Dante looked at him. Really looked at him. Lucas Bennett met his eyes without flinching, without aggression, without the performance of toughness that men usually brought when they encountered Dante Valenti. He simply stood his ground, calm and direct, like a man who had nothing to prove. Dante had never disliked anyone more in his life. He looked back at Isabella. "This isn't finished," he said. "Yes," Isabella said. "It is." She turned back to Lucas, and the movement was deliberate, Not dramatic, not designed to wound him. Just final. A woman choosing where to direct her attention. A woman demonstrating with one quiet gesture that he no longer commanded her. Dante walked back through the terrace doors alone. Inside the gala, the room continued exactly as it had before. No one had seen. No one knew. The world moved at its usual pace, indifferent to the private earthquake that had just rearranged everything inside him. He found a corner, a brief margin of space between conversations, and stood there with a glass he didn't taste, and replayed the image he could not stop seeing: Isabella laughing before she kissed him. The ease of it, the absence of performance, the way she had simply been herself, standing in her own life, taking up her own space. And Lucas Bennett had reached out, and she had let him, and it had been so natural that it looked like the most obvious thing in the world. When had Dante last made her look like that? He tried to remember. He went back through 7 years and searched for a single moment when Isabella had laughed the way she laughed tonight, that open and unguarded and free. He couldn't find it. That was the moment the crack became something larger. He left the gala at 9:15. His driver took him home through city streets, slick with light and rain, and Dante sat in the back seat and did not look at his phone, and did not review any documents, and did not make any calls, which was a thing he never did, because Dante Valenti's professional life was a machine that ran 24 hours and required constant attention, and he had fed it every waking hour for 15 years without complaint. Tonight, he couldn't think about any of it. He kept seeing her hand in Lucas's. He kept hearing her voice. "I know him better after 2 hours than I knew you after 2 years. And the worst part, the part that settled in his stomach like cold stone, was that he could not argue with her. He had no ammunition against the truth because it was exactly that, the truth. He had given Isabella everything he knew how to give. Money, security, status, protection. And he had withheld the one thing she actually needed because it was the one thing he had never learned to offer: himself. The car pulled up to the house. Dante sat in it for 2 full minutes after the driver stopped. He looked at the house, all its lights, its security, its formidable and immaculate exterior, and he thought about how Isabella had walked through those rooms for 7 years, filling them with small attempts at warmth that he had noticed only in retrospect. The flowers she chose for the dining room, the way she always left the kitchen light on when he worked late, the meals she stopped cooking when she finally accepted he wouldn't be home. He thought about the last meal she cooked. She had made her grandmother's pasta recipe. He had come home 4 hours late and the food was long cold, and she was sitting at the kitchen table with a book she wasn't reading, and she had looked up at him with an expression so carefully emptied of accusation that it was worse than any accusation, and said, "I kept a plate warm for you," and he had said, "I'm not hungry," and gone to his office. He had not realized until this moment that she had never cooked that recipe again. He went inside. The house was impeccable and empty and silent in the particular way of spaces where no one lives anymore, only exists, and Dante walked through it with the new and unwelcome ability to see it through her eyes, and found in almost every room the ghost of a woman who had kept trying long after she had every reason to stop. He went to his office and stood in front of the window and looked out at the city, and for the first time in 15 years allowed himself to ask the question he had always been too controlled to entertain. What did I actually want? Not what did he need to secure, not what territory needed protecting, not what empire needed building. What did he want? The answer came immediately, and without drama, in the plainest and most honest voice his mind possessed her. He had always wanted her. Even in the years when he drove her away with his silence and his distance and his inability to give her what she needed, he had wanted her. He had wanted her so much that the wanting had terrified him, because Dante Valenti had learned early and permanently that everything you wanted could be used against you. That desire was a vulnerability, that love was the most dangerous exposure a man in his position could allow himself. So he had protected himself, and in protecting himself, he had destroyed them. He picked up his phone. He found her contact still listed as Isabella, even though his attorney had suggested he update his directory months ago, and he stood there with the phone in his hand and his thumb hovering over the call button. He did not call. because he understood standing in his empty office on the night she had kissed another man that calling her was not what she needed. That showing up had always been his instinct, and his failure, showing up with resources, with fixes, with solutions to problems she hadn't asked him to solve, when all she had ever wanted was for him to show up as himself. He didn't know how to do that. He was 42 years old, and he did not know how to show up as himself. The realization was so simple and so devastating that he had to set the phone down and press both hands flat against the window glass and breathe for a moment. Outside, the city moved through its night indifferent and constant. Somewhere out there, Isabella Romano was beginning her new life. And Dante Valenti was standing in the ruins of the life he had been too proud and too afraid to fight for, while he still had the chance. The next morning he did something he hadn't done in years. He asked his housekeeper to pull out the files he kept in the third drawer of his study. Not business files, not contracts, not the operational documents of his empire, but the personal drawer, the one he never opened in front of anyone. Inside was a photograph. It was from their second year of marriage, taken at a small restaurant, not the kind of place they usually went to. Nothing expensive or curated, just a neighborhood place Isabella had wanted to try because she'd read a review about their handmade bread. Dante remembered being resistant. He remembered thinking it was below the level of where they should be seen. He remembered almost canceling. But he had gone. And in the photograph, Isabella was leaning across the table with both elbows on the white paper tablecloth, and she was laughing that same laugh, the real one, the one he had seen on the terrace last night. And Dante remembered that he had said something ridiculous and uncharacteristic, and she had responded with that laugh. And he had thought for one unguarded second, I would burn everything I've built to keep hearing that sound. Then his phone had rung, and he had answered it. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he put it in his breast pocket and called Reyes and said, "Clear my morning." "Sir, you have the consortium meeting at—" "Clear it," Dante said. Reyes paused. In 15 years, Dante had never cleared a consortium meeting. Of course. He drove himself another thing he never did to the building on Calloway Street that he looked up before he left the house. The Haven Project facility designed by Lucas Bennett, built for women restarting their lives. He sat in his car across the street. He didn't go inside. He wasn't there to announce himself or to intercept Isabella or to make any dramatic gesture. He was there because he needed to see at the place she had chosen the work she had moved toward when she moved away from him. The building was modest and clean with large windows. The windows Lucas Bennett had fought for, he thought, with a twist of something he refused to call what it was. Through the glass, he could see women moving through the common space. A table with papers. A wall with something pinned to it. A room where people were learning something. After 20 minutes, Isabella came out. She was wearing a light jacket, carrying a folder, talking on the phone. She moved with a focus and ease that he recognized from early in their marriage, that particular version of herself that she had slowly stopped showing him, as though she had decided at some point that it wasn't worth the effort. She had not stopped being that person. She had just stopped being that person with him. She walked right past his car without seeing it still talking and disappeared around the corner. Dante sat in his car for another 10 minutes after she was gone. Then he started the engine and drove not back to his office, not back to his house, but to the address he had been avoiding for 2 years, the address of the man who had warned him repeatedly, with the bluntness of someone who had nothing left to lose, that he was making a catastrophic mistake. His father. Enzo Valenti was 71 and retired in the way that men who built things are never entirely retired. He still made calls, still had opinions, still set a coffee cup on his kitchen table with the authority of someone who had once commanded rooms. He opened the door and looked at his son. "You look terrible," he said. "I know," Dante said. Enzo stepped back and let him in. Chant. They sat at the kitchen table with coffee, and Dante told him everything. Not the sanitized version he delivered to associates and attorneys. The real version. The terrace. Isabella's eyes when she turned. The simplicity of the word mine and the way it had sounded coming from his own mouth. Enzo listened without interrupting, which was itself unusual. When Dante finished, his father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you remember what your mother told me when I first started building?" Dante shook his head. "She said, Enzo, you will build something that lasts, or you will build something that matters. But you cannot build both at the same time, with the same hands." He wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. "I chose wrong. You know this." Dante did know this. His mother had died believing she had never been truly chosen, a belief Enzo had spent the last decade trying and failing to make peace with. "You think I made the same choice," Dante said. "I think you made my choice," Enzo said, "but you still have time to make a different one." "She's moving on." "She's living," Enzo said. "That's different from moving on. Moving on means she's trying to forget. Living means she remembers exactly who she is." He looked at his son. "The question is whether you can become someone worth remembering with." Dante set down his coffee cup. "I don't know how," he said. It was the first honest admission he had offered anyone in longer than he could count. And saying it out loud was like releasing pressure he hadn't known was there. His father nodded slowly. "Then that is where you begin," Enzo said. "Not with what you can give her, with who you have to become." That evening, a message appeared on Isabella's phone from a number she no longer recognized. Dante's new personal line, she would realize later. It contained no apology, no request, no declaration. It said only, "I understand now that I owe you nothing, and you owe me nothing. But I want you to know that I saw you this morning through the window of the Haven building. Not to follow you, not to interfere. I was there because I wanted to understand what you chose and why you chose it. You chose something real. I spent 7 years giving you everything except that. I'm sorry it took losing you for me to see it." Isabella read the message 3 times. Then she set her phone face down on the table and sat with her hands in her lap. Lucas, sitting across from her with his own coffee, noticed the change in her expression and didn't ask. He simply reached across the table and set his hand near hers. Not on hers, not claiming anything, just available. She appreciated that more than she could articulate. After a long moment, she picked up her phone and looked at the message one final time. She did not respond. But she did not delete it either. Because a part of Isabella Romano, the part that had loved Dante Valenti through 7 years of silence and absence, recognized something in those words that she had spent years waiting to hear. It was too late. She knew it was too late. But she was human enough to acknowledge that it landed somewhere inside her, that message. That it found the bruised and tired place where her love for him had lived, and then worn out, and still underneath all the exhaustion and the grief and the hard-won peace she had built, still held the faint shape of something she had once believed in completely. She breathed in. She breathed out. She turned to Lucas and said, "Tell me more about the Calloway Street building, the windows you fought for." And Lucas, who understood instinctively that she was choosing presence over the past, smiled and told her the whole story, and she listened with her whole self, and the evening moved forward the way evenings do, when you have decided firmly and finally that you are allowed to live in them. Outside the city breathed its ordinary breath, and in the space between what had ended and what was beginning, Isabella Romano chose again, and without hesitation, herself. Isabella did not sleep well that night. Not because of grief, not because she regretted anything, but because the message sat somewhere in the back of her mind, like a splinter she couldn't locate precisely enough to remove, present, faintly irritating, impossible to ignore entirely. She got up at 5:30, made coffee, and stood in her small kitchen in the apartment. She had chosen herself, in the neighborhood she had chosen herself, and looked around at the life she was in the process of building, and told herself the truth, the way she had learned to do in these early morning hours, when there was no one to perform for. She had felt something when she read his words. Not love, not hope, not the old pull that used to make her rearrange her entire interior world every time Dante Valenti walked into a room. Something smaller and more complicated than any of those things. Something that lived in the part of her that remembered who she had been before she became his wife, before she had slowly, incrementally, so gradually, she almost hadn't noticed, handed over the edges of herself to fit inside the shape of his life. She felt it, and then she set it down. Because Isabella Romano had spent the last 4 months learning the difference between feeling something and acting on it, between acknowledging a wound and reopening it, between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. She drank her coffee. She got dressed. She went to work. The Haven Project offices opened at 8, and Isabella was there at 7:52 with a box of pastries from the bakery 2 blocks away and a folder full of grant applications she had spent the previous week drafting. The director, Margaret Holloway, a woman in her 60s with the specific exhaustion of someone who had been doing essential work without enough resources for 20 years, looked up when Isabella walked in and said, "You're early again." "I know," Isabella said. "I brought croissants." Margaret took one without ceremony. "The Alderman Foundation called yesterday. They want a site visit." "When?" "Next Thursday. They're sending their program director and 2 board members." Isabella sat down across from her. "I'll prepare the presentation." "It's a lot of work for 1 week." "I know." Isabella opened her folder. "Tell me what they need to see." This was what she had discovered in the months since the divorce proceedings began work. Not work as escape, she had been careful about. That distinction had watched other women use productivity as a way to avoid processing what needed to be processed, and she had refused to do the same. But work as meaning. Work as the particular satisfaction of spending your energy on something that mattered beyond yourself. For 7 years, the work of Isabella's life had been the management of Dante Valenti's domestic and social world. Meals and events and appearances and the 1,000 invisible acts of maintaining the surface of a marriage. She had done all of it with care and competence and had told herself it was enough. It had not been enough. Here at Haven, she was building something. She was sitting across from women who had arrived with nothing, no money, no plan, no safety, and helping them understand that nothing was in fact a beginning. She knew this more than academically now. She knew it from the inside. She spent the morning working on the grant presentation and did not think about Dante's message, and did not think about Lucas's hand near hers on the table the previous evening, and did not think about anything except the work directly in front of her, which was the only kind of thinking she had found reliably useful since everything changed. At 11:15 her phone rang. Private number. She almost didn't answer. "Hello?" "Isabella." A voice she didn't immediately recognize, low, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had rehearsed this call many times. "This is Enzo Valenti." Her hand tightened on the phone. Dante's father. She had not spoken to Enzo in over a year. Not since a strained family dinner where she had smiled across the table at a man who had watched his son make mistake after mistake and had chosen for years to say nothing. She had liked Enzo once. She had liked his directness, his rough warmth, the way he could fill a room without needing to dominate it. But she had also learned that his silence about Dante's failures had its own kind of cost. "Enzo," she said carefully. "I'm not calling on his behalf," Enzo said immediately. "I want to be clear about that. Dante does not know I'm calling." "Then why are you calling?" A pause. She heard him shift in his chair, a small sound that conveyed age and weight, and something that might have been humility. "Because I made the same mistakes he made," Enzo said. 40 years ago I made the same mistakes, and I didn't have anyone call the woman I was destroying to tell her she deserved better. My wife went to her grave thinking she came second." His voice didn't waver, but it carried something underneath it that Isabella recognized as old settled grief. "I'm not calling to ask you to forgive him. I'm calling to tell you that you were right to leave. And that what you're building, I heard about the Haven Project, that's the right thing. That's the thing that matters." Isabella was quiet for a moment. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because my son needs to hear the truth from someone who isn't trying to protect him," Enzo said. "And I think you're the only person left who can deliver it in a way that actually reaches him. Not to take him back, not to give him anything, just the truth, the way you see it." He paused. "He's going to come to you. He won't be able to stop himself. And when he does, I'm asking you to be honest with him rather than kind." "There's a difference. With men like Dante, there's always a difference," Enzo said. "Kindness lets him leave feeling like a good man. Honesty makes him become one." The call ended 2 minutes later. Isabella set her phone on her desk and stared at it. Margaret appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" "Yes," Isabella said. And then, because Margaret was the kind of woman who did not accept deflection, his father called. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "What did he want?" "To warn me," Isabella said, "and to tell me the truth." "Those are usually the same thing," Margaret said, and went back to her office. The week moved forward. Isabella threw herself into the Alderman Foundation presentation with the focused energy of someone who had learned that purpose was the best antidote to the particular noise that filled the space where love used to live. She called donors. She organized data. She drafted talking points and revised them again. She sat with 3 of the women currently in Haven's transitional program and listened to their stories with the specific attention of someone who understood, not theoretically, not abstractly, what it cost to start over. Lucas called on Wednesday evening. "How's the presentation coming?" he asked. "Better than yesterday," she said. "Worse than I want it to be." "That's how all the good work feels until it's done." A pause. "Are you eating?" She looked at the desk where she had in fact forgotten to eat lunch. "Yes," she said. "Isabella." "I'll eat." She heard him smile through the phone. "I'm designing a community center in Millbrook. They want the rec room to feel like a living room, not an institution. I keep thinking about what you said at the gala about the difference between spaces that help people feel safe versus spaces that just look safe." She pulled her cardigan tighter and leaned back in her chair. "They're completely different things. Safe-looking spaces are designed for the person evaluating them. Actually, safe spaces are designed for the person living in them." "Exactly. Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "When you were at the Haven building for the first time, not as a volunteer, but as a client, the way you might have been, what would have made you feel like you could actually breathe there?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not because it was intrusive, but because it was precise. He wasn't asking her to perform expertise. He was asking her to access her own experience and treat it as knowledge worth building something from. She thought about it seriously. "Light," she said finally, "and the absence of grand gestures. Places that are trying too hard to be welcoming feel like they're compensating for something. I would have wanted it to feel like somewhere a regular person lived, not a rescue." "That's exactly it," Lucas said. "That's what I've been trying to articulate for a week." He paused. "You're good at this." "At what?" "Seeing what things actually are, not what they're supposed to be." She didn't answer immediately. Because the compliment was simple and offered without agenda, and she had spent so many years in a marriage where her perception was treated as an inconvenience rather than an asset that she didn't quite know what to do with, being told plainly that the way she saw things mattered. "Thank you," she said, and meant it completely. After the call, she sat for a while in the quiet of her apartment. She thought about Lucas and the ease of talking to him, the way conversations with him felt like stretching muscles she hadn't used in years, rather than the constant careful calibration that conversations with Dante had required. She thought about Enzo's call. She thought about the message she still hadn't deleted. And then, because she was honest with herself, even when honesty was inconvenient, she thought about Dante, not the cold figure at the end of their marriage, not the man at the gala with possession in his voice, but the man she had married. The one who had once in the first year driven 2 hours in the wrong direction because she mentioned she wanted to see the ocean, and he hadn't said anything. Just started driving, and when she realized where they were going, she had turned to look at him, and he had been watching the road with the quiet satisfaction of a man who was doing exactly the thing he wanted to do. She had loved him so much in that moment. That man still existed somewhere inside the empire Dante had spent 15 years constructing over himself. She just could no longer afford to spend her life excavating for him. Thursday came. The Alderman Foundation site visit went better than Isabella had planned, and worse in one specific detail, their program director. A careful woman named Dr. Susan Park asked halfway through the presentation whether Haven had plans to expand their economic development programming. And Isabella said yes, before she had confirmed the funding to say yes, which Margaret caught with a single look across the table that Isabella would need to account for later. But the board members were moved. One of them, a retired judge named Harold, who was in his late 70s, and had the particular quality of someone who had spent decades watching people try to deceive him, and had become perfectly calibrated to detect sincerity, asked Isabella directly, "What brought you to this work?" The room went quiet. She could have given the polished answer. She had practiced the polished answer. I became aware of the gap between resources available to women in crisis and the actual infrastructure needed to support genuine rebuilding, and I felt I had skills that could contribute to closing that gap. She didn't give the polished answer. "I left a marriage," she said. "Not an abusive one, I want to be clear about that, but one where I had spent so long being someone else's supporting character that I had forgotten I was the main character of my own life. I came here because the women here are doing the hardest thing there is. They're starting over, and I know something about starting over now. I wanted to be useful to that." The retired judge looked at her for a long moment. "That's the most honest answer I've heard in a grant presentation in 30 years, he said. They received confirmation of the site visit approval 2 days later. Margaret called her with the news and said, "Well done." And then, with the directness that Isabella had come to love about her, "Now about that expansion programming you promised." "I know," Isabella said. "Do you have a plan?" "I will by Monday." Margaret made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You know, when you first came in here 4 months ago, I thought you were going to last 3 weeks. Women who've had a certain kind of life usually don't stay. It's too hard, and it doesn't pay anything, and it requires you to care about people who are going to break your heart regularly." "It does all of those things," Isabella agreed. "But you stayed." "I stayed," Isabella said, "because it's the first place in a long time where I've felt like myself." A brief silence. "Good," Margaret said. "Then figure out the expansion plan. We need you here." After she hung up, Isabella sat with those words for a moment. "We need you here." Not Dante's version of needing her, which had been about filling a role, completing a picture, maintaining an image. An actual need. Her actual skills. Her actual self. She was still sitting with it when her doorbell rang. She was not expecting anyone. She checked the security panel by the door, the one she had installed herself, a practical concession to the world she had lived adjacent to for 7 years, and saw the figure in the hallway, and felt her whole body go still. Dante. He was standing in her hallway with his hands in his jacket pockets, and he was not wearing a suit, for the first time she could remember seeing him outside of their home. He was wearing dark jeans and a plain jacket, and he looked, this was the word that arrived without her permission, he looked like a person rather than a persona. She opened the door. They looked at each other. "I should have called," he said. "Yes," she agreed. "You should have." "Are you going to let me in?" She considered it. Not for dramatic effect, she was past performing emotions for Dante Valenti, but genuinely. Because she thought about what Enzo had said. Be honest rather than kind. And she thought about what she needed, which was not to have this conversation standing in a doorway. "Come in," she said. "But I want you to know that I have work to finish tonight, and this is not going to be a long conversation." He stepped inside. He looked around the apartment. She watched him do. Watched his eyes move across the small rooms, the bookshelves she had filled with books she had always wanted to read, and never had time for. The kitchen table covered in grant papers. The single large photograph of a sunrise she had taken herself on her phone at 5 in the morning, 2 months ago, when she couldn't sleep, and had gone to the park and stood there while the light changed and felt for the first time like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. "This is yours," he said. It wasn't a question. But something in the way he said it, not enviously, not dismissively, but with a kind of recognition, made her understand that he was seeing what she had built here and seeing it clearly. "Yes," she said, "it is." She did not offer him coffee. She sat on the edge of her couch and looked at him and waited. Because she had learned that one of the most powerful things you could do in a conversation with Dante Valenti was simply wait. He was a man who filled silence with action, with business, with movement, with control. Sitting still with an empty silence was not something he did comfortably. He sat in the chair across from her. He looked at his hands for a moment, and she recognized that gesture, the brief downward glance that meant he was reaching for words in a place he didn't usually go, the internal space where feelings lived and that he had spent decades boarding up. "I went to see my father," he said. "I know," she said. His eyes came up. "He called you." "He did." Something moved across his face. "What did he say?" "That you were going to come here. That I should be honest with you instead of kind." She held his gaze. "I'm going to do that." He nodded slowly. "You had a reason," Isabella said. "I understand that now. You kept me at a distance because you believed it protected me. I spent a year being angry at the silence and not understanding what was underneath it." She paused. "But here's what I need you to understand, Dante. A reason isn't the same as a right. You decided alone, without asking me, without giving me any information, without treating me like a partner in my own life, that the safest thing for me was to be kept outside of everything real. You made that decision for me because you thought you knew better, and that is the thing I cannot forgive." The silence that followed was complete. "Not the distance," she continued. "Not the long nights, or the missed dinners, or the years of feeling invisible. Those things hurt. But what I cannot forgive is that you decided what my life should look like without consulting me. You treated my safety like a project you were managing, and my feelings like a variable you could control. You did not trust me with the truth. And that is not love, Dante. That is ownership." He didn't flinch. She gave him credit for that. He sat and took it the way a man takes something he knows he has earned. "You're right," he said. "I know I'm right. I don't know how to fix it." "You can't fix it," she said. "That's what I need you to hear. This is not a problem that has a solution. You cannot build me a better house or hire a better attorney or make a donation to the right foundation and have this be resolved. 7 years happened. They happened to me inside my body, inside my life. You cannot undo them." His jaw tightened. Not in anger, she could read the difference now years too late, but still. Not anger, pain. "Then what do I do?" he asked. "You become someone better," she said simply. "Not for me, not to win me back. You become someone better because you owe it to the next version of your own life to be a man who knows the difference between protecting someone and controlling them." A long pause. "Is there someone else for you?" he asked. His voice was careful. He was not asking with possession this time. She could hear the difference. "Lucas is kind to me," she said. "He listens. He sees me." A pause. "That's new, Dante. After 7 years, someone simply seeing me is new." The words landed between them and sat there. "I know," he said very quietly. "I know it is. And I know that's on me." She looked at him. Really looked the way she had stopped letting herself look at him in the last years of their marriage because looking had hurt too much. She saw the 42-year-old man who had built an empire out of control and protection and the fear of vulnerability, and she saw the cracks in it now, the places where the structure was failing because it had never been built to hold a human heart. She felt something. She refused to name it. "You should go," she said. He stood, and this time he didn't say, "This isn't finished." He didn't make claims or issue statements or reach for the authority that had always been his default response to a world that wasn't cooperating with his expectations. He simply said, "I'm sorry, Isabella." 3 words. No performance, no agenda. She believed them. "I know you are," she said. He walked to the door and stopped with his hand on the frame. His back was to her. "The man at the gala," he said. "Bennett. What about him?" "He looked at you like—" He stopped, started again. "He looked at you the way I should have looked at you every day for 7 years." He walked out. The door closed behind him. Isabella sat in the silence of her small, chosen, entirely her own apartment, and breathed in and breathed out and refused firmly and completely to cry. She lasted approximately 3 minutes. Then she sat on her kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and cried for Dante Valenti. Not for the man who had arrived tonight, humbled and honest, but for the man she had believed he could be on a drive to the ocean 10 years ago. And for the version of herself that had kept believing it long after the evidence suggested otherwise, and for the particular grief of loving someone with everything you had and watching it not be enough to change either of you. She cried for about 8 minutes. Then she washed her face. Then she sat back down at her kitchen table and opened the grant application and went back to work. What she didn't know, what she could not have seen, was that Dante sat in his car outside her building for 22 minutes after he left. He did not call anyone. He did not send messages. He sat with the weight of everything she had said and let it be heavy because he had spent his entire adult life refusing to let things be heavy, and look where that had gotten him. You treated my safety like a project you were managing and my feelings like a variable you could control. He played the words back. He thought about every time he had intercepted a problem before Isabella could encounter it. Every time he had made a decision that affected her without telling her why. Every business trip he explained as necessary without explaining what necessitated it. Every fear he swallowed rather than share, because sharing fear felt like weakness, and weakness in his world was the thing that got people hurt. He had believed genuinely profoundly, without any self-deception, that his silence was sacrifice. He had not understood that to Isabella it felt like erasure. He pulled out his phone. He did not call Isabella. He called Reyes. "The community investments portfolio," he said. "The ones we've been deferring for 2 years. Housing, education. The women's economic development grants. Schedule a review meeting for next week. All of them." Reyes was quiet for a moment. "That's a significant shift in—" "I know what it is," Dante said. "Schedule it." He put the car in drive. He did not go to his office. He did not go to the house that had been Isabella's house and still felt like her absence given architecture. He drove to a part of the city he rarely visited, the North End, where the streets were real and the buildings were worn, and the people were not the people who attended charity galas. And he drove slowly and looked at it and tried to see it the way someone who needed help would see it, rather than the way an empire builder surveyed territory. It looked different. He had known in the abstract that his money moved through this city, that his investments and his decisions created ripples in places he never visited. He had told himself this was enough, that the downstream effects of his success benefited people who would never know his name. He had been performing charity rather than practicing it. The distinction when it arrived was humiliating. He was not a man who accepted humiliation easily. He accepted this one. He drove home and poured 1 glass of whiskey, which he did not finish, and went to his study. And for the first time in 15 years, he opened the drawer of his desk that held not business documents, but the private accounting of a life photographs. Letters, small objects that meant things he had never spoken out loud. He found the photograph from the restaurant. He had kept it all this time. He had known that. But he had not looked at it in years, and looking at it now, Isabella with her elbows on the white paper tablecloth laughing, was different from any time he had looked at it before. Because now he knew what he had done with that laugh. He had not fed it. He had not protected it. He had not arranged not protected it. He had not arranged his life around keeping it alive. He had let it starve. He set the photograph on his desk and looked at it for a long time. Then he opened his laptop and began doing something he had never done: research. Not business research. Not competitor analysis or market data. He searched for everything written about the Haven Project. He read grant applications and impact reports and testimonials from women who had come through the program. He read a profile of Margaret Holloway in a local nonprofit newsletter that described her as relentless, practical, and unwilling to let anyone leave her office without feeling like they matter. He found one mention of Isabella, a quoted comment in a community brief attributed to Isabella Romano, program coordinator, and he read the single sentence 3 times. "We're not trying to fix broken women. We're trying to build a world that stops breaking them." He sat back. He thought about the woman who had written those words, or spoken them probably, and had them transcribed because Isabella had always been better with the spoken word than the written one, another thing he had noticed too late and appreciated too little. She was not the woman he had married. She was more. She had become more while he was building his empire, and he had not noticed until she left, and that was the thing he was going to have to live with for the rest of his life. He closed the laptop. He looked at the photograph one more time. Then he placed it in the center of his desk, not in the drawer, not hidden, but visible where he would see it every morning. And he made himself a promise that he had no illusions, would undo any damage, but that felt nonetheless like the only place left to start. He was going to become someone who deserved to be in the same world as the woman she had become. Not to win her back, not to earn forgiveness, but because the alternative was to spend the rest of his life as the man who had let her laugh die, and that was a legacy he refused to accept. He turned off the light. He went to bed. For the first time in months, he did not lie awake calculating. He lay in the dark and simply felt the weight of what he had lost, not trying to strategize around it, not trying to convert it into action, just feeling it the way a man feels a wound he has finally stopped pretending isn't there. It was the most honest thing he had done in years. And somewhere across the city, in a small apartment full of books and grant papers and a single photograph of a sunrise, Isabella Romano was asleep at her kitchen table, her cheek on her folded arms, a pen still loosely in her hand, the expansion plan half-drafted beside her. She was exhausted. She was building something. She was in the most complete sense of the word alive. The expansion plan was finished by Sunday night. Isabella emailed it to Margaret at 11:47 p.m. with a subject line that said, "Draft. Please tear it apart," and then closed her laptop and sat back and felt the particular satisfaction of having done a thing completely. Not perfectly. Completely. There was a difference she had only recently learned to appreciate. Her phone lit up 30 seconds later. Margaret. It's almost midnight. Go to sleep. Then 4 seconds after that. Also, this is excellent. Isabella smiled and went to bed. She slept well. Better than she had in weeks. Better if she was being honest with herself in the specific way these early morning hours demanded than she had slept in the last 2 years of her marriage, when sleep had become something she performed beside a man who was always already gone, even when he was lying right next to her. Monday arrived the way Mondays do when you have something to move toward fast, purposeful, a little breathless. She was at Haven by 8. She had 3 intake appointments before noon. A woman named Diane, 44. 2 kids, a job she'd lost when her marriage collapsed because her husband had controlled every professional contact she had. A woman named Rosa, 29, quieter than the others who sat across from Isabella, and looked at her hands and said almost nothing until Isabella said, "You don't have to explain anything today. Today, you just have to be here." And Rosa had looked up with the expression of someone who has been waiting a long time to hear exactly those words. A third woman who had driven 4 hours with a single suitcase because someone had given her a number and she didn't have anywhere else to go. By noon, Isabella had forgotten entirely about Dante's visit. By 2 in the afternoon, she had remembered it again because Lucas called. "Are you free tonight?" he asked. "Probably not before 7. 7 works. I want to show you something." A pause. The Millbrook Community Center. They poured the foundation last week and you can already see how the main room is going to feel. I want your read on it. You want my read on a foundation? I want your read on what it's going to become. She could hear the smile in it. You have a way of seeing finished things in unfinished spaces. That might be the most useful thing anyone has ever said about me, she told him. She met him at the Millbrook site at 7:15, and they walked through the framed structure with flashlights because the electrical wasn't finished yet. And Lucas narrated what each space would become with the focused energy of someone who spent their professional life translating imagination into physical reality. And Isabella listened and asked questions, and pointed to a corner near what would be the eastern windows, and said, "This is where people are going to actually gather. Not the center of the room. This corner." Lucas stopped and looked at the corner, and then at her. "How do you know that?" Because the light will be good here in the morning, and people follow morning light when they're not sure where to go yet. Put something here that invites sitting, not chairs in rows, something that looks like it belongs to someone. He was quiet for a moment. I've been designing community spaces for 12 years, he said, and I would have put the primary seating cluster in the center. He looked at the corner again. You're right. I know, she said, and surprised herself by meaning it without qualification. 6 months ago, she would have softened it. Would have added, I think, or the instinctive hedge of a woman who had been trained by years of living beside a man who held the authority in every room. She didn't hedge, Lucas noticed. She could tell by the way he looked at her, not with surprise exactly, but with recognition, the way you recognize something becoming what it always should have been. They ate dinner after, at a place nearby, a small Vietnamese restaurant that Lucas knew, and they talked until 9:30 about the Millbrook Center, and about Haven's expansion plan, and about a documentary Isabella had watched the previous week, about women who had rebuilt small businesses after economic collapse. And somewhere in the middle of the conversation, Lucas reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she turned her hand over and held his back, and it was simple and warm and present in a way that she was still learning to receive without bracing for it to be withdrawn. She got home at 10. There was a voicemail on her landline. She had kept the landline a small stubbornness about the apartment being entirely and completely hers from a number she recognized. Dante's attorney. Not Dante. His attorney. She listened to the message standing in her kitchen with her jacket still on. Ms. Romano, this is Richard Hartwell. Mr. Valenti has asked me to inform you that he has arranged for a charitable contribution of $500,000 to be directed to the Haven Project Foundation, anonymously structured as a 3-year grant. He has asked that you not be told the source, but he has also instructed me to inform you that he cannot in good conscience allow you to discover this without your knowledge. He felt you deserved to know. Please do not feel obligated to respond. The message ended. Isabella stood in her kitchen for a long moment. Then she sat down. $500,000. 3 years of Haven's expansion programming essentially funded. The grant that Margaret had been chasing for 2 years. The money that would mean Diane and Rosa and the woman with the single suitcase would have a real place to rebuild rather than a good idea with insufficient resources. And Dante had tried to do it anonymously. Had tried, and then had told his attorney to tell her anyway. He felt you deserved to know. She closed her eyes. This was the thing about Dante Valenti that had always destroyed her defenses at the exact moment she thought she had finally built them high enough. He was capable of this. Of gestures that were real, that cost something, that demonstrated an understanding of what mattered. He had always been capable of it. The tragedy of their marriage was not that he was incapable of love. It was that he had deployed that capacity so rarely, so insufficiently, so buried under the management of his empire, that she had almost convinced herself it didn't exist. It existed. It had always existed. She sat with that for a long time. Then she picked up her phone and called the number she had memorized without meaning to, and no longer tried to pretend she hadn't. He answered on the second ring. I know it was you, she said. A long beat. Hartwell wasn't supposed to. He told me you instructed him to tell me. She paused. Dante. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, he said. Simply, without performance. That's not a complete answer, and you know it. A long pause. Because I sat in your apartment last week, and I looked around at what you've built, and I understood maybe for the first time that what you're doing at Haven is real. That those women need real resources. That I have real resources. His voice was quiet and deliberate, the voice of a man choosing each word. And because I have spent 15 years using money to fix things I couldn't face directly, and I didn't want to do that this time. So I tried to make it anonymous. And then I realized that making it anonymous was still a way of managing you, still a way of arranging things for you without your knowledge. And so I told Hartwell to tell you. Isabella was quiet. That was the right call, she said finally. I know. The money will help a lot of people. That's the point of it. Dante. She stopped, started again. This doesn't change anything between us. I need you to understand that. I know, he said. That's not why I did it. Is it not? The honesty of the question hung in the air, because she knew him. She had known him for 10 years, and she understood the architecture of his motivations, even when he himself didn't have the vocabulary for them. A long pause. Maybe partly, he said. Maybe there's a part of me that wanted you to know that I'm capable of doing something that matters. That's not the primary reason. But I won't lie to you about it being part of it. She exhaled. That's the most honest thing you've said to me in 10 years, she said. I'm practicing, he said. And there was something in the word practicing that landed differently than anything else he had said, because it was the word of a man who understood that honesty was a skill he had never developed and was now at 42 learning from scratch. Good night, Dante, she said. Good night, Isabella. She hung up. She sat at her kitchen table and looked at nothing for a while. Then she called Margaret. Margaret answered immediately, which meant she was still awake and still working, which was normal. We need to talk tomorrow, Isabella said. Something's come through for the expansion. A significant something. Anonymous donor. Completely legitimate. I need you to trust me on that. Margaret's voice sharpened. How significant? 3-year grant, 500,000. The silence that followed was the particular silence of someone recalculating everything. Isabella, Margaret said. I know. That's the whole expansion. I know. Who? Anonymous, Isabella said firmly. And that needs to stay that way. Completely. A pause. You know who it is. It doesn't matter who it is. What matters is what it builds. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Then, with the pragmatic grace of a woman who had been doing this work for 20 years and understood that the world was complicated and that clean hands were a luxury most good work couldn't afford. All right. I'll see you at 8. 7:30, Margaret said. We have planning to do. Good. The week that followed was the most productive Isabella had experienced since she joined Haven, and also the most complicated in ways that had nothing to do with work. The grant confirmation arrived through Hartwell's office on Tuesday, structured cleanly and anonymously, exactly as promised. Margaret spent 2 hours going over the documentation with their legal advisor, who confirmed it was legitimate and unconditional. By Wednesday afternoon, they had a preliminary expansion plan on the table, 2 new positions to fill, and a list of women on the waiting list who could be served immediately. Diane, the woman with the 2 kids and the collapsed professional network, was the first name on the list. Isabella called her personally. We have a place for you, she said. In the expanded program. It starts in 3 weeks. I'm going to send you everything you need. Diane was quiet for a moment. I keep waiting for the other shoe, she said finally. I know, Isabella said. There is no other shoe. This is just a door, that's all. You still have to walk through it. What if I can't? You drove yourself here with 2 kids and a suitcase because someone gave you a number and you decided to believe it was worth calling, Isabella said. You already know how to walk through doors. Diane laughed a wet, surprised laugh that sounded like something releasing and said, Okay. Okay, Isabella said. She set the phone down and sat for a moment with the specific satisfaction of that exchange, the clean and uncomplicated joy of having been useful to someone in a real way. That afternoon, Lucas stopped by the office. He brought coffee from the specific place 2 blocks away that Isabella had mentioned in passing 3 weeks ago, the one with the good dark roast, and set it on her desk without ceremony, and sat in the chair across from her and said, You look like something happened. Several things happened, she said. Good things. Mostly. She picked up the coffee. A significant grant came through for the expansion. He smiled, and it was the smile of someone who was genuinely pleased for her not performing pleasure, not calculating how her success reflected on him, just plainly happy that something good had happened to someone he cared about. She noticed it the way she noticed all of Lucas's small, consistent expressions of decency, with a gratitude that still surprised her. "The Alderman Foundation," he asked. "Anonymous," she said. Something shifted in his expression. A small shift, a recalibration. He was a perceptive man. She had understood this early about him, and she watched him process the word anonymous against the context of what he knew about her life. "Lucas," she said. "You don't need to explain anything," he said. "I want to." He looked at her steadily. "It was Dante," she said. "He arranged it. He tried to keep it anonymous, but he had his attorney tell me because he said I deserved to know." She watched Lucas's face. "I called him. We talked." A beat. "How are you?" Lucas asked. Not how did the conversation go. Not what did he say. Not are you going to see him again. Just how are you? "I'm okay," she said. "I'm genuinely okay. He's changing. I can see it. And it doesn't change what I need, which is my own life, not a better version of the one I left." She paused. "But it's complicated. I'm not going to pretend it isn't." "You don't have to pretend anything with me," Lucas said. "I know." She reached across the desk and touched his hand briefly. "That's the thing I keep learning to trust." He turned his hand over and held hers for a moment. "I'm not going anywhere," he said. "I'm not going to make you choose anything or prove anything or manage my feelings about your past. I'm just—" He paused, choosing the words. "Here. That's all I'm trying to be." She believed him. That was the most important part. She believed him. Not because he was perfect, or because their relationship was uncomplicated, or because the history with Dante didn't exist and didn't occasionally send tremors through the present, but because Lucas Bennett had demonstrated consistently and without drama that he was exactly what he presented himself to be. There was no hidden architecture to him, no interior empire she was being kept away from, no part of himself he was protecting at her expense. He was simply profoundly present. And she was still learning at 32, after 7 years of the opposite, that presence was the thing. It was the whole thing. 10 days after the grant was confirmed, Dante's world cracked open in a way that had nothing to do with Isabella and everything to do with the empire he had built. His name appeared in a federal investigation, not as a target that distinction would take 2 news cycles to clarify, but as a named associate in a racketeering case being built around 3 men who had for the past decade operated in the outer orbits of Dante's business infrastructure. Men he had known. Men he had in several documented instances done legitimate business with, which made the legitimate business suddenly look not entirely legitimate in the flat, unforgiving light of a federal filing. Isabella learned about it the same way everyone else did. She was eating lunch at her desk when Claire called. "Are you watching the news?" "I'm eating lunch." "Turn on the news," Claire said. She pulled up the news app on her phone and read the headline, and felt something cold pass through her. She sat with it for a moment. Then she called Margaret into her office and closed the door and said, "I need to tell you something about the anonymous grant." Margaret sat down. "The donor is Dante Valenti," Isabella said. "My ex-husband. He arranged it through legitimate channels. The money is clean. The structure is clean. Our legal advisor confirmed everything. But his name is currently in the news, in connection with a federal investigation. And I need you to know that, before you read about it somewhere else." Margaret looked at her for a long moment. "Is the money clean?" she said. "Yes." "You're certain?" "I've spent 10 years adjacent to his finances. I know the difference between his legitimate business and his—" She paused, choosing words. "The parts I chose not to look at too closely. This money came from the legitimate side, I'm certain." Margaret nodded slowly. "Then we continue. There may be press attention." "There may be," Margaret said. "We will handle it the way we handle everything, accurately and without drama." She paused. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine," Isabella said. "Isabella." She stopped. I knew something like this was always possible. Living beside him for 7 years, I understood what world he operated in. I chose to leave that world. I left it. This is not my crisis. She said it clearly and firmly, and believed approximately 80% of it, which was the best she could offer herself in that moment, and which she judged to be sufficient. Margaret leaned forward. What's the other part? Isabella looked at her. The part you don't believe, Margaret said. I've been running a program for women who are very good at explaining why their feelings don't count for 20 years. What's the part you're managing? A long pause. He's in trouble, Isabella said quietly. And a part of me, a very specific, very tired, very stubborn part of me wants to do something about that, even now, even after everything. She exhaled. That's not love anymore. That's just the echo of it, the habit of caring. Caring doesn't expire on a schedule, Margaret said, even when it should. I know. What are you going to do? Isabella straightened in her chair. Nothing, she said. I'm going to do nothing, because it is not my crisis, and because the most important thing I can do right now is not make it one. She paused. And because I have an expansion program to build, and 3 women moving in next week, and a grant presentation to prepare for the city council. Margaret studied her for a moment. Then she nodded. Good, she said. Now eat your lunch. Job. Dante did not call her. She had half expected him to. Or perhaps more honestly, she had noticed herself half expecting him to, which told her something about the habits of mind she was still in the process of dismantling. He didn't call. What she received instead, 48 hours after the initial news story, was a handwritten letter delivered by courier. Not an email. Not a text. Handwritten on plain paper in Dante's specific and controlled penmanship that she would have recognized anywhere. She sat down at her kitchen table before she opened it. Isabella, you will have seen the news. I want you to know what is true and what is not. The men named in the investigation were associates of mine in a period of my life I am not proud of. I chose to distance myself from them 2 years ago before any of this began, because I was trying badly, slowly, insufficiently, to become a different version of what I had been. The federal investigation is not aimed at me. My attorney is managing it. I am cooperating fully. I am not writing to ask for anything. I am writing because you spent 7 years beside me without knowing the full truth of what I was, and I owe you honesty, even when it arrives too late to be useful. The world I built was not always clean. I want you to hear that directly from me, rather than from a news headline. I was not the man I should have been in business any more than I was the man I should have been at home. I am aware of both of these things. The grant to Haven came from money I can account for completely. I want you to be certain of that. I am not writing because I expect a response. I am writing because silence between us has cost enough. Dante. Isabella read the letter twice. Then she folded it and set it on the table and sat with her hands flat on either side of it. He had told her the truth. Not all of it, probably. The full truth of Dante Valenti's professional life was something she had spent 7 years carefully not examining, because examining it would have required a response she hadn't been ready to give. But he had told her enough. He had admitted what he was. He had done it without attorney speak, without protective language, without the careful PR framing that men in his position deployed when their worlds began to crumble. He had written it by hand on plain paper and sent it by courier because he had understood that some truths needed to be carried physically, not transmitted digitally. She called Lucas. "Can you come over?" she said. He was there in 20 minutes. She showed him the letter without preamble. He read it standing at her kitchen table. She watched his face, careful, attentive processing without performance. He set it down. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like, I'm standing at the intersection of several different things," she said. "And I need to think out loud." "Then think out loud." She stood up and moved. She always thought better moving, and Lucas leaned against the counter and watched her with the patient attention of a man who had nowhere else he needed to be. "I spent 7 years," she said, "not asking the questions I should have asked. Not because I was stupid, because I was afraid of the answers, because the answers would have meant making decisions I wasn't ready to make." She stopped. "I chose comfort over truth, and I am not going to do that again, so I need to be honest about what's in that letter." "Okay," Lucas said. He was part of a world that wasn't clean. I knew this. Not specifically, I didn't know the specifics, but I knew the shape of it. I knew there were parts of his life he kept separate, and I accepted that separation because the life he gave me was comfortable, and because I told myself it wasn't my business. She paused. "It was my business. I just didn't make it my business." "You were 25 when you married him," Lucas said quietly. "That's true. And it's also not the whole explanation." She stopped moving and turned to look at him. "I'm not letting myself off the hook for the choices I made. I'm not saying I was a victim of his deceptions. I was a participant in them by omission, because omission was more comfortable." A pause. "I need you to know that about me." Lucas looked at her for a long moment. "I already knew that," he said. "Not the specifics, but I know who you are. I know the kind of clarity it takes to build what you're building at Haven. I know the kind of self-awareness it takes to say what you just said." He pushed off from the counter and closed the distance between them. "You're not the person you were at 25. He's apparently not the person he was 2 years ago. People change. The question isn't who you were. It's who you are." "Who am I?" she asked, not helplessly, as a genuine question directed at someone she trusted. "Someone who reads a letter from the man who hurt her and asks what she owes the truth instead of what she owes her comfort," Lucas said. "Someone who told a woman this morning that there is no other shoe." He paused. "You're the kind of person who walks through the door, Isabella. You've always been that person. You just spent a lot of years walking through his door instead of your own." She looked at him. She had not cried in front of Lucas before. Not actually cried. She had been composed, and when composure slipped, she had managed it privately in bathroom mirrors and kitchen floors, the way she had learned to manage everything during the marriage. She didn't manage this. 2 tears simply. Not dramatic. Not performed. Lucas put his hands on her face and wiped them away with his thumbs, and didn't say anything about it, which was exactly right. She breathed in. She breathed out. "I need to respond to him," she said. "Not to reopen anything, but because he told me the truth, and I'm not going to let that go unanswered." "Okay," Lucas said. "Not tonight." "No," he agreed. "Not tonight. Tonight I think I need to eat dinner and not think about any of this for approximately 2 hours." Lucas's mouth curved. "I can do that. What do you want?" "Something that requires neither of us to cook or make decisions," she said. "There's a Thai place 3 blocks away." "Perfect." They went. They ate pad see ew and spring rolls, and a soup that Isabella finished completely and asked for more of. And they talked about the Millbrook project, and about a book Lucas was reading about the history of public spaces, and about a story Isabella had heard from Rosa that week, shared with permission about the first thing Rosa had done when she got her own key to her temporary apartment, which was to go to every room and open the closet doors just to prove she could. She opened every closet, Isabella said, just to prove no one was going to tell her to close them. Lucas listened with his elbows on the table. "That's the whole thing, isn't it?" he said quietly. "That's what you're building. Not a shelter, not a program. The right to open your own closets." "Yes," Isabella said. "Exactly that." They sat with that for a moment, the simple rightness of it. Outside the city, moved through its evening indifferent and ordinary, and full of people navigating the complicated distance between who they had been and who they were still becoming. Isabella paid for dinner. Lucas let her. She appreciated that the simple equality of it, the absence of the subtle power transaction that generosity between a man and a woman so often carried. They walked back to her building in the mild evening air. At her door, Lucas said, "What are you going to say to him?" She thought about it. "The truth," she said. what he actually cost me, what he actually gave me, what I actually feel. She paused. The things I should have said 7 years ago and didn't, because I was afraid of what saying them would mean. You're not afraid now. I'm afraid every day, she said. I've just stopped letting it make decisions for me. He kissed her goodnight, simple, warm, exactly right. She went inside. She sat at her kitchen table with the letter in front of her and a blank piece of paper and a pen. Not because she needed to write the response tonight, but because she needed to begin it. To make the first mark on the page that said, I am responding. I am present. I am not hiding. She wrote Dante and stopped, because the next thing she needed to say was the thing she had carried for 7 years and had never said out loud, never put into words, never trusted him enough to give him even when they were married. She was going to trust him with it now, not because she wanted him back, not because his money had bought the right, not because she was the same woman who had walked out of Hartwell and Associates 6 weeks ago without looking back, but because the truth between two people who had shared a decade of life deserved to be spoken finally and completely, even when it was too late to change anything. She picked up the pen again. She began to write, and in his office across the city, Dante Valenti sat at his desk with the photograph from the restaurant in front of him and a glass of water he kept forgetting to drink, waiting for a response he had no right to expect and no plan to deserve, but that he had told himself the truth about. He wanted it. He wanted it more than he had wanted anything in years. Not because he thought it would fix them, because he finally understood that being known by her fully honestly without the protection of his empire or her patience was the only thing that had ever made him feel like a real person, rather than the man he had constructed over the ruins of one. He picked up the photograph. He set it back down. He waited. The letter took Isabella 3 nights to finish, not because she didn't know what to say. She knew exactly what to say. She had known for years, had carried it in the specific compartment of herself she had learned to keep sealed during the marriage, because opening it would have meant dismantling the careful architecture of a life she wasn't ready to leave. She was ready now. The problem was that honesty, when you finally commit to it fully, has a way of expanding beyond what you initially planned for. She would write 2 paragraphs and realize there was something underneath them that also needed saying. She would finish a page and understand that the page before it had been preamble for something she hadn't yet reached. By the 3rd night, she had 4 handwritten pages on plain paper. She read them once, beginning to end, standing at her kitchen table. Then she folded them into an envelope, wrote his name on the front in her own handwriting, and called a courier service. She did not reread them. She did not second-guess. She sealed the envelope and handed it over, and went back inside and made tea, and called Claire, who answered on the first ring, because Claire had been waiting for this call for 6 weeks. I sent it, Isabella said. How do you feel? Empty, Isabella said. But the good kind, the kind where something heavy used to be. Claire was quiet for a moment. What did you say? Everything, Isabella said. 7 years of everything. The letter arrived at Dante's office at 9:17 on a Thursday morning. His assistant brought it in with the morning correspondence and set it on the corner of his desk the way she always did, and Dante looked at it from across the room before he touched it. He recognized Isabella's handwriting immediately, the particular slant of it, the way she formed her capital letters with slightly more pressure than the lowercase ones. He had seen that handwriting on birthday cards and grocery lists, and the occasional note she used to leave on his desk in the early years. Small pieces of connection she stopped offering somewhere in year 4, when the notes went unacknowledged long enough that she stopped writing them. He dismissed his assistant. He sat down. He opened the envelope. Dante, you told me the truth. I'm going to return that. What you cost me is not what you think you cost me. You think the damage was the loneliness, the missed dinners, the years of feeling invisible. And those things were real, and they hurt. And they accumulated in me, the way water accumulates in a basement, slowly, quietly, until one day you realize the floor is gone. But that's not what I'm writing about. What you actually cost me was my own voice, not through cruelty. You were never cruel to me, Dante. And I want to be accurate about that because I am tired of stories that require a villain, and I am not going to make you one to make my own pain simpler to explain. You were not cruel. You were absent. And absence over years has a specific effect on a person who loves you. It teaches them to make themselves smaller, to need less, to stop asking for what they need, because the asking consistently produces nothing, and after enough years of producing nothing, asking starts to feel like stupidity. I stopped asking. I stopped asking so completely that I eventually stopped knowing what I would have asked for. I lost the question itself. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I did not just lose you. I lost the ability to hear my own wants clearly because I had spent so long overriding them in order to remain in a life that required my silence as a condition of its peace. That is what I am still recovering from. Not your absence, my own. What you gave me is also not what you think. You gave me a decade of watching a man operate at the highest levels of everything he chose to pursue. I watched you solve problems that would have destroyed other people. I watched you remain composed in situations that would have broken anyone around you. I watched you carry extraordinary weight without letting it show, and even when I came to understand that the not letting it show was itself part of the problem, I also kept the lesson underneath it that endurance is real, that you can survive more than you believe you can. I have survived more than I believed I could. You taught me that. I will not pretend otherwise. Here is what I feel now honestly. I am not angry at you anymore. I was. For months, I was so angry that it lived in my chest like something physical, a tightness that didn't release until I started working at Haven and started converting that anger into something useful. The anger is gone. What replaced it is something more complicated and harder to name, a kind of grief for the marriage we could have been, for the version of you that would have trusted me with his fear instead of protecting me from it, for the years we cannot recover. I grieve that. I am honest enough to tell you that. I am also honest enough to tell you that I am happy. Not in the fragile way I used to be happy in our marriage, which was the happiness of a woman who has arranged her expectations down to the level of what's available. I am happy in a way that belongs entirely to me. I built something. I found my voice again. I found a man who listens to it. I am not writing to hurt you with that. I am writing it because you told me the truth about your world, and you deserve the truth about mine. I forgive you, Dante. Not because you've earned it. I'm not sure forgiveness works on an earnings model, but because carrying the alternative was making me heavy, and I need to be light for the work I'm doing. I forgive you for myself as much as for you, maybe more. I hope you become who you are trying to become. I mean that with no performance and no strategy. I simply hope it. Do not write back. Not because I don't want to hear from you, but because I think we need to practice not reaching for each other as the first response to difficulty. We did enough of that while we were married, and in our own ways, and it didn't serve either of us. Take care of yourself. Isabella. Dante read the letter once. Then he set it on his desk and sat back and looked at the ceiling. He stayed like that for 11 minutes. He knew it was 11 minutes because he could see the clock from where he was sitting, and he watched the numbers change, and did not move, and did not reach for his phone, and did not summon anyone, and simply sat with what she had given him. I lost the ability to hear my own wants clearly because I had spent so long overriding them. He had done that. He had not intended to. He had not once in 10 years thought to himself, I will systematically remove her ability to know what she wants. He had loved her in his broken and insufficient way, and the damage had happened not through malice, but through a failure of imagination so complete that he had not even understood it was failure. He had not imagined what her interior life was like. He had not asked. He had treated her as a known quantity, as a certainty in his uncertain world, and in doing so, had failed to see that certainty, when it is assumed rather than earned, is just another word for taking someone for granted. He picked up the letter again. He read the forgiveness part twice. Something happened in his chest when he read it. Something that was not relief, exactly. Not gratitude exactly, but something in the neighborhood of both. That was also undercut by the specific pain of understanding that forgiveness and return are not the same thing, and that he had been offered the first and would never have the second. He had known that. He had told himself he knew that. Knowing it and feeling it arrive in 4 pages of her handwriting were different experiences. He put the letter back in the envelope. He put the envelope in the drawer with the photograph. Then he picked up his phone and called his attorney and said, "I want to move forward on the community investment restructure. All of it. Full portfolio review. Schedule it for next week and clear whatever needs to be cleared." "There's the federal matter still pending." "I know about the federal matter," Dante said. "This is separate from that. This is about what comes after." A pause. "I want to be the kind of organization that can stand in daylight, Richard. Start with that." He hung up. He sat for one more moment. Then he opened his laptop and went back to work. Not the work of maintaining an empire, but the newer, harder work of learning to build something that didn't require darkness to survive. 3 days after the letter was delivered, Lucas asked Isabella to show him where she grew up. She looked at him across the coffee table where she had been working on the expansion program's volunteer handbook. "That's not a small ask," she said. "I know, we don't have to." She thought about it. "My mother still lives there." "Also, not a small thing. My mother is—" She paused, searching for accurate language. "She's direct. She's been direct about Dante for years in a way I didn't always appreciate at the time, and now appreciate enormously. She will have opinions about you." "I have a mother," Lucas said. "I understand opinions." She looked at him. He was sitting in the chair across from her with a book face down in his lap and his reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he looked— She thought exactly like what? He was a man who was comfortable in a room that wasn't his. Comfortable with silence. Comfortable with not needing anything from the moment, except what it actually contained. "Saturday," she said. "Saturday." He agreed and picked up his book. Elena Romano lived 40 minutes outside the city in the house where Isabella had grown up, a house that was not large or impressive, but was so thoroughly inhabited, plants in every window, photos on every surface, a smell of coffee, and something baking that seemed to exist regardless of the hour, that it felt more alive than most buildings Isabella had been in. Her mother opened the door before they had reached the top step. Elena Romano was 63 and had the specific energy of a woman who had decided somewhere in her late 40s that she did not have time for things that didn't matter. She was small and dark-haired, and her eyes went immediately with surgical efficiency to Lucas. "You must be the architect," she said. "Lucas Bennett," he said, extending his hand. She shook it and looked at him the way she had once looked at Isabella's high school boyfriend and every professional decision Isabella had brought home for judgment. Assessing, not unkind, but completely without pretense. "You're taller than Dante," she said. "Mom," Isabella said. "It's an observation," Elena said, stepping back to let them in. "Not a ranking, although—" She looked at Isabella with an expression that communicated volumes in the compressed language of mothers and daughters. Come in. I made too much food." She had made an extraordinary amount of food. They sat at the kitchen table for 3 hours. Elena fed them and asked Lucas questions that were direct without being interrogative about his work, about the Millbrook Community Center, about what he thought the most underserved design need in the city was. Lucas answered everything with the straightforward ease of a man who had nothing to manage about himself. And Isabella watched her mother recalibrate in real time, the initial wariness shifting into something warmer. The moment that broke the last of it open was when Elena asked out of nowhere, while she was refilling the pasta bowl, "What do you see when you look at my daughter?" Lucas didn't hesitate. Someone who figured out how to grow in the wrong direction for years and then turned herself completely around, he said, and didn't ask for applause about it. Elena set the pasta bowl down. She looked at her daughter. Isabella felt her throat tighten. "That's the right answer," Elena said, and went back to the kitchen. Later, when Lucas was outside taking a call from his office, Elena sat across the table from Isabella with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup and looked at her daughter with the expression she reserved for true things. "He's good," she said simply. "I know. Not perfect. Nobody is. but good in the ways that matter. A pause. The ways Dante was never good at. I'm not replacing one with the other, Isabella said. I know that too. Elena reached across and touched Isabella's hand briefly. I'm not saying you are. I'm saying the difference matters. Pay attention to it. Don't get so used to the good that you forget it's what you deserve. Mama, I'm serious, Isabella. Her voice was quiet and firm. I watched you for 7 years love a man who treated your heart like background noise. I watched you make yourself smaller every year and tell me you were fine. You were not fine. No, Isabella agreed. I wasn't. Are you fine now? Isabella considered the question honestly, the way her mother had always demanded. I'm becoming something better than fine, she said. Elena studied her for a moment. Then she nodded once definitively, the way she nodded when something had been settled. Good, she said. Then eat more pasta. On the drive home, Isabella sat in the passenger seat with the window down a few inches and the evening air moving through and felt something she identified carefully and without embellishment as peace. Not the absence of difficulty, not the resolution of everything complicated, just the specific peace of a person who has looked at her own life clearly enough to know that the direction is right, even when the terrain is still uneven. Lucas drove with one hand on the wheel and didn't fill the quiet with anything, which was the thing she kept coming back to: this man's fundamental comfort with silence as something shared rather than something to be managed. Your mother liked you, she told him. Your mother was assessing whether I was worth the risk to her daughter, he said, which I appreciate. She should be. Are you? He glanced at her. I'm trying to be. That's the honest answer. You've been very clear, he said, about preferring honest answers to comfortable ones. Dante's lawyer called me this morning, she said. Lucas didn't react visibly, which she had learned was his way, not suppressing, just not performing. The federal investigation, she said. He's cooperating. Apparently he's providing information that goes well beyond what's required. His attorney called to let me know that nothing in the investigation touches anything related to Haven. He wanted me to have direct assurance. How do you feel about that? Relieved about Haven, she said. And something else about Dante. Something I'm trying to name accurately. She paused. Cooperating fully in a federal investigation when you have the resources to fight it indefinitely is not the move of a man maintaining his empire at all costs. It's the move of a man who's decided some costs are too high. She looked out the window. He's changing, really changing. Not for me. I don't think it's for me anymore. Does that make it easier or harder? Lucas asked. She thought about it. Easier, she said finally, because I needed him to change for himself. Changing for me would have been one more version of his life being organized around my presence or absence. Changing for himself means... She stopped. It means the man I believed existed inside all that control actually does exist, and he's finding his way to the surface. A pause. That doesn't mean I made the wrong choice. I made exactly the right choice. But it means the grief I have for the marriage isn't grief for something imaginary. Lucas reached across the center console and took her hand without a word. She held it. They drove the rest of the way home in a silence that was full rather than empty. 2 weeks later, Dante did something that the city's business community talked about for months. Without announcement, without press release, without any of the strategic communications infrastructure that typically accompanied a significant corporate pivot. Dante Valenti restructured 20% of his business portfolio, divesting from 3 subsidiaries that his attorney privately described as operating in legally gray territories, and redirecting the capital into a community development trust administered by an independent board. The trust's first 3 grants went to affordable housing after-school programming in the North End and a legal aid organization serving immigrant families. The business press was baffled. Reyes called him the morning the news broke because it became news despite the absence of any press release. These things always did, and said, "Sir, we're getting calls from every..." "Tell them no comment," Dante said. They want to know what's driving the pivot. No comment. The consortium is requesting an emergency meeting. Schedule it. I'll explain it once and I won't explain it again. He paused. And Reyes, the Community Development Trust, needs an executive director. I want someone independent, someone who has no connection to my business interests, someone who will run it without any deference to what I think about any given decision. Another pause. If it operates right, I should occasionally be uncomfortable with what it funds. Reyes was quiet for a moment. I'll find the right person, he said. Good. Dante went to the consortium meeting 3 days later and sat at the head of the table where he had always sat and looked at the assembled faces of men who had built their worlds on the same foundations he had control. Strategic opacity, the cultivation of fear as a management tool, and said simply and without apology, I am changing how I operate. I understand this affects some of you. I'm not asking for approval. You're walking away from... I'm restructuring, Dante said. There's a difference. The operations that can operate cleanly will continue. The ones that can't will be wound down. He looked around the table. I would encourage each of you to consider the same. The silence that followed was the silence of men recalibrating. An older man at the far end of the table, a man named Caruso, who had been in the room at the founding of everything, leaned forward and said very quietly, This is about the woman. The room stiffened. Dante looked at Caruso. This is about who I want to be for the rest of my life, he said. The woman in question has moved on and has nothing to do with what I'm doing. I'd ask you not to reduce a serious decision to a romantic narrative. Caruso held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded, slowly, with something that might have been from a man like Caruso respect. Fair enough, he said. The meeting ended. Dante drove home. He was almost at the house when his phone rang. Private number, but a different private number than before one he had seen only twice. He answered. This is Daniel Marsh, Deputy U.S. Attorney, said the voice. Mr. Valenti, I wanted to call you personally to let you know that based on your cooperation and the information you've provided, our office will not be pursuing any action against you directly. This isn't a formal communication that will come through your attorney, but I felt a personal call was appropriate given the unusually comprehensive nature of your cooperation. Dante pulled over. Thank you, he said. Can I ask you something off the record? Yes. Most people in your position provide minimum cooperation. You gave us everything, more than we asked for, more than you were required to. A pause. Why? Dante sat in his car on the side of the road. He thought about Isabella's letter, about the photograph from the restaurant, about his father's voice saying you still have time to make a different choice, about the Community Development Trust and the executive director he hadn't hired yet, about the north end of the city and the women at Haven and the man who had designed windows that let in more light. Because I decided I was done paying the maintenance cost, he said. A pause on the line. The maintenance cost. Of a life I'm not proud of, Dante said. It has a maintenance cost. You pay it every day in compromises and silence and arrangements you don't want to be making but have convinced yourself are necessary. And one day you realize the cost is higher than the asset is worth. He paused. I decided I was done. Another silence. That's an unusual answer, the deputy attorney said. It's the true one. Isabella did not know about the consortium meeting or the phone call from the deputy attorney. She knew about the trust restructure because it was in the news, and Claire texted her a link at 7 in the morning with 3 exclamation points, which from Claire was significant. She read the article over coffee. She read it twice. Then she set her phone down and picked it up again and went back to the beginning and read the specific language used to describe the Community Development Trust's charter, operated by an independent board with an explicit mandate to prioritize historically underserved communities without deference to the interests or preferences of the trust's founding donor. Without deference to the interests or preferences of the founding donor, he had built a thing that was designed to operate without him. She sat with that for a long time. She was still sitting with it when Margaret called at 8:15. "Have you seen the news?" Margaret said. "Yes." "Is this—" "Don't," Isabella said quietly. "Please don't ask what I know about it. It doesn't belong to me. What he's doing doesn't belong to me. It belongs to him." A pause. "You okay?" "I'm good," Isabella said, and meant it completely. "I'm genuinely good, Margaret. What time do you need me?" 9, Margaret said. "Rosa wants to talk to you specifically. She has something to tell you." Isabella arrived at 9 to find Rosa waiting in the small common room off the main hallway, sitting with a folder in her lap, and her back straight, with a posture that had not been there 6 weeks ago, the physical vocabulary of a woman who had decided to take up the space she was sitting in. "I got the job," Rosa said. Isabella stopped. "The administrative coordinator position at Millbrook Community Services," Rosa said. "I interviewed on Tuesday. They called yesterday. I start in 2 weeks." She was holding the folder very tightly. "I've never had a job with benefits before. I didn't know I could." Her voice wobbled once and then steadied. "You told me. 4 weeks ago, you told me that starting over doesn't mean starting from nothing. It means starting from everything you already know." I kept hearing it in my head during the interview. Isabella sat down across from her. "Rosa," she said. "I wanted to tell you first," Rosa said. "Before anyone, because you're the one who—" She stopped. "You're the one who made me feel like I was already enough to try." Isabella felt the familiar tightening in her throat that happened every time Haven worked exactly the way it was supposed to work. "You did that?" Isabella said carefully. "I just said words. You did the interview. You did the hard part." "I know," Rosa said. "But you said the words." They sat with that together for a moment, the specific miracle of words reaching the right person at the right time and taking root. "When you start," Isabella said, "will you come back and tell the women who are just beginning? Tell them what?" "That it's possible," Isabella said. "That's the whole thing. That's all you need to tell them." Rosa nodded. Her grip on the folder loosened. "Okay," she said. "Okay," Isabella said. She went to her office after and sat down and looked at the expansion plan on her desk, the one funded by Dante's anonymous grant, administered by their independent board, already serving 12 women who had been on the waiting list, and felt the complicated layered reality of her life settle into something she could hold. Dante's money was doing real work. The work was hers. The life around the work was hers. Lucas was in it. Rosa was starting her job. Margaret was relentless and practical and unwilling to let anyone leave without feeling like they mattered. She was inside something real. That evening, Lucas called. "I saw the news," he said. "Yes." "How are you?" "Exactly where I'm supposed to be," she said. A pause. He let that land. "I have something to ask you," he said, "and I want you to know there is absolutely no pressure in any direction." "Okay. The Millbrook Community Center opening is in 6 weeks. It's going to be a public event. The mayor's office is involved. There'll be press." A pause. "I want you there. Not because it looks good, because you're part of why it is what it is. Your input is in the bones of that building, Isabella. The corner seating, the light, the way the common room doesn't feel like an institution." He paused again. "I want the person who helped me understand what the building needed to be there when it opens." She was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. "I'll be there." "Yeah. Yes, Lucas." And she smiled alone in her apartment at the end of a day that had held more than most. "I'll be there." After she hung up, she walked to her window, the one that faced east, that filled with light in the morning, in the way she had chosen specifically when she chose the apartment, and she stood there and let herself feel it all at once. The grief for what had been. The gratitude for what was. The particular dignity of having lived through something that could have made her smaller and coming out the other side more herself than when she went in. Somewhere across the city, Dante Valenti was becoming someone better. She believed that now. She believed it not as a wish, but as an assessment, because she had spent 10 years learning to read him, and what she read now in his actions, rather than his promises, was a man who had finally understood that the empire he had built was only as real as the cost it extracted. She did not need him to become better for her. She needed it for herself, for the part of her that had loved him and deserved to know that love had not been entirely wasted on a man incapable of growth. He was growing. She had moved. These were not the same direction, but they were both finally forward. She turned away from the window. She went to her kitchen table. She opened the expansion plan and got back to work. The Millbrook Community Center opened on a Tuesday morning in October, and the city showed up. Not just the mayor's office and the press corps and the community leaders who had championed the project through 3 years of funding battles and zoning disputes and the particular exhaustion of trying to build something good in a system that preferred maintaining things as they were. The neighborhood showed up. The people who would actually use the building, the parents and the kids and the elderly residents who had been navigating a 12-block stretch without a single public gathering space for the better part of a decade, they came out in numbers that the event organizers had not planned for, and that required 3 additional folding tables and an emergency call to the bakery 2 blocks away for more coffee. Isabella arrived at 8:30, an hour before the official opening, because Lucas had texted her the night before, "Come early. I want you to see it before the crowd gets in." She walked through the front doors alone. She stood in the main common room, and she understood immediately what Lucas had meant, because seeing a thing you had a hand in building, seeing it finished and complete, and entirely itself, was different from every other kind of seeing. The light came through the eastern windows exactly the way she had described it to him months ago, wide and unhurried, falling across the floor, in a way that made the room feel inhabited, even before anyone was in it. The corner she had pointed to, the one she had said people would gather in before they knew where to go, held a cluster of low chairs and a wide table and a lamp that someone had chosen with the specific wisdom of knowing that overhead lighting in a new space tells people they are being observed, while a lamp tells them they are welcome. She stood in the corner. She sat in one of the chairs. She looked at the room from that angle, at the windows and the door and the way the whole space was oriented toward light, and felt the particular fullness of something that had started as a conversation over Pad CU and had become real walls, a real floor, real light, a real place where people would bring their real lives. "Well?" Lucas's voice from the doorway. She turned. He was standing with his hands in his jacket pockets and the morning light behind him and the expression of a man trying and failing to appear unconcerned about what she was going to say. "The corner works," she said. He exhaled. She laughed. He crossed the room and sat in the chair beside her, and they both looked at the space together for a moment, the easy silence of 2 people who had learned to share quiet without filling it. 12 years, he said. "I've been building things for 12 years, and I've never brought someone to a site before the opening." "Why not?" "Because I never had someone whose read I trusted more than my own." He said it simply, with no performance. "Until you." She looked at him. "That's..." She stopped. Started again. "That means more than I can explain quickly." "Take your time," he said. "We've got 45 minutes before anyone else arrives." She laughed again, the real laugh, the open one, the one she had reclaimed over the past months as her own property. And Lucas smiled in response, the way he always smiled when she laughed, like he was genuinely glad the sound existed. "I want to tell you something," she said, "before it gets loud in here." "Okay." "I came into this year completely certain of exactly one thing," she said, "that I needed to stop organizing my life around someone else's presence or absence. That was the whole plan, just that one thing." She paused. "I didn't plan for Haven to become what it is. I didn't plan for the Alderman grant or the expansion or Rosa or any of it. I didn't plan for you." Lucas was very still beside her. "And I need you to know," she continued, "that the fact that I didn't plan for you is the best thing about you. Because my plan was right, I needed to stop building around someone else. And somehow, you showed up in a way that didn't ask me to do that. You were there. You kept being there. And you never once made me feel like being there came with conditions." He turned to look at her fully. "Isabella, I'm not finished," she said. I love you. She said it plainly without preamble or softening the way she had learned to say true things. I'm telling you now, before the mayor and the press and the neighborhood get here, because I don't want to say it for the first time in a crowd. I want to say it here, in this corner, in the light. Lucas looked at her for a long moment. I love you, he said. I've been in love with you since the night of the gala, when you said the difference between safe-looking spaces and actually safe spaces, and I thought this woman sees the inside of things. I've been waiting for the right moment to tell you. Was this the right moment? It was exactly the right moment, he said. He kissed her in the corner with the morning light coming through the eastern windows, and it was nothing like the kiss at the gala. Not the beginning of something tentative and new. Not a statement made in front of anyone. Not a moment loaded with the weight of other people's watching. It was just them, in a room they had built together in the quiet before everything began. When it ended, Isabella rested her forehead against his for a moment. The crowd is going to be here soon, she said. I know. I'm not ready to share you yet. We've got 38 minutes, he said. She laughed, and the room held the sound of it. The real laugh. The open one. The way good spaces hold the sounds of the people living in them. The opening was everything the community needed and more than the organizers had planned for. By 10 o'clock, the common room was full. The corner had 3 children sitting in it with a grandmother who was teaching them a card game, and the mayor gave a speech that was mercifully shorter than anticipated and contained one genuinely true sentence in the middle that Isabella wrote down on her phone. The measure of a city is not its tallest buildings. It is whether the people who need a place to gather have one. She texted it to Margaret, who responded, Coming to the opening of our new wing with that energy. Save the date. The new wing. Haven's expansion built on the foundation of a grant that had arrived anonymously and then not anonymously, converting the resources of a man's reckoning into the architecture of other people's second chances. Isabella thought about that sometimes, the specific alchemy of it, the way damage and repair could move through systems in ways that were complicated and morally imperfect, and still somehow produce something worth having. She thought about it again, now watching a woman she didn't know sit down at a table in the Millbrook common room and open a notebook and begin to write the focused and private concentration of someone doing a thing that belonged entirely to themselves. That image stayed with her for the rest of the morning. The crowd thinned by noon. The press had their footage and their quotes. The mayor's team had departed. The folding tables were being cleared by a volunteer crew that moved with the efficient cheerfulness of people who wanted to be exactly where they were. Lucas found her by the eastern windows. Hungry? He asked. Starving, she said. I forgot to eat this morning. Again. Don't say again like that. I'm saying it exactly like that, he said, and she took his hand, and they walked out into the October afternoon, and the light was different out here, thinner and cooler, the particular quality of fall light that always made Isabella feel like the year was making a decision about itself. Her phone buzzed as they reached the sidewalk. She glanced at it. Unknown number. But the prefix was one she recognized from the text Dante had sent earlier in the year before she had blocked and unblocked his number during a week of uncertain feelings that she was not particularly proud of and also not going to apologize for. She stopped walking. Lucas noticed. Everything okay? Yes, she said. Give me 1 minute. She stepped a few feet away and answered, Isabella. Dante's voice was different from every other time she had heard it this year. Not controlled, not managed, just present. The voice of a man without a prepared agenda. Dante, she said. I'm sorry to call. I know you said don't. It's okay. What is it? A brief pause. My father had a stroke this morning. He's stable. He's going to be all right, the doctors are confident. But I'm at the hospital and He stopped, started again. I needed to hear a voice that knew him. That's all. I'm sorry. I know this isn't... Don't apologize, she said. Which hospital? St. Catherine's. But you don't need to. I know I don't need to, she said. Which floor? A pause that held more than she expected. Fourth, he said. Cardiac. She turned back to Lucas. He was watching her with the steady expression of a man reading a situation accurately and waiting. I need to go to St. Catherine's, she said. Enzo had a stroke. He's stable, but go, Lucas said. Immediately, without negotiation. Lucas, Isabella. He held her gaze. Go. Enzo was good to you, and Dante is... He paused, choosing the word with the precision of a man who understood the weight of them. He's part of your history. History doesn't disappear because the present changed. He touched her face briefly. I'll get lunch by myself. Call me later. She looked at him. I love you, she said again, because it was new and true, and she was not going to stop saying it until it became as natural as breathing. I love you, he said. Go. She went. St. Catherine's fourth floor smelled like every hospital floor antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular institutional quiet of a place where the stakes are always high and the waiting is always endless. Dante was in the family waiting area at the end of the corridor. He was sitting in a chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands loosely clasped and his head slightly bowed, and he looked. Isabella registered this without sentimentality, just clearly like a man who had been frightened. Not performing worry. Actually frightened in the specific way that adult children are frightened when a parent's mortality becomes suddenly concrete. He looked up when she came through the door. Something moved across his face. You came, he said. Of course I came, she said. How is he? Stable. They're monitoring. He exhaled. They say full recovery is likely. The stroke was small. He was lucky. A pause. His housekeeper found him. She calls every morning at 7:30 and he didn't pick up. Isabella sat down across from him. He's going to be angry about the fuss, she said. Something in Dante's expression shifted a brief, real flicker of a smile. He already told the cardiologist that he was fine and people were being dramatic. That's Enzo, yes? The almost smile faded. He looked at his hands. He was telling me this morning before it happened. He called me around 7. He was telling me about a neighbor's garden, going on about the tomatoes. His voice was careful and deliberate. I was half listening. I had 3 emails open and I was answering one while I had him on the phone. He stopped. I told him I'd call him back. The weight in those last 4 words was complete. Isabella didn't offer comfort. She understood that this was not a moment for comfort. It was a moment for witness. You can tell him you were distracted when he wakes up properly, she said. He'll yell at you for it. That will be its own form of confirmation that he's all right. Dante looked at her. Why did you come? He asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. Because Enzo called me 6 weeks ago, she said, and told me the truth about things he didn't have to tell me the truth about. And because I loved him when I was your wife, and that doesn't have an expiration date either. She paused. And because you sounded like a person, Dante, not a managed version of one. And I've spent a lot of this year trying to be honest about what I owe to honesty. He was quiet. The man you're becoming, she said carefully, is someone I would have stayed for. I want you to know that. Not because it changes anything about where we are, but because you wrote me the truth, and I owe you the truth back, and the truth is what you're doing. Now the trust, the cooperation, the choosing daylight, that's the man I believed was there. I wasn't wrong to believe it. His jaw tightened. Not with emotion suppressed. With emotion held acknowledged, not performed. It's too late, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, she said gently. It's too late for us. Not because of bitterness. Because the life I'm building is built now. It has its own foundation. It's not waiting. She paused. But it's not too late for you. That's what I came here to say, maybe. That what you're doing matters. Not to me, not in the way it might have once mattered to me. But it matters in the world. The trust, the investments, whatever comes next. She looked at him steadily. You still have time to make your life mean what you want it to mean. Dante sat with that for a long time. Around them, the hospital continued its patient, purposeful work. I keep thinking about that restaurant, he said finally. The one with the handmade bread. She knew exactly which restaurant. You almost didn't come, she said. I almost didn't come, he agreed. And then I did. And I remember thinking, sitting across from you while you were laughing, that I would burn everything I'd built to keep hearing that sound. He paused. And then my phone rang, and I answered it. You always answered it. I know. His voice was very quiet. I know. A nurse appeared in the doorway. Mr. Valenti, your father is asking for you. He's awake, and he says her exact words, tell my son to stop hovering in hallways like a ghost. Dante stood. He looked at Isabella. Come say hello, he said. He'd want to see you. She hesitated for only a moment. Briefly, she said. They walked down the corridor together, not close, not distant, the natural spacing of two people who had once occupied each other's gravity and had since established their own separate orbits, but could still move in proximity without collision. Enzo was propped up in the hospital bed, looking precisely as disgusted with the situation as Isabella had predicted. When he saw her in the doorway, his expression changed completely. Isabella? He said. And in the way he said her name was everything the affection of a man who had genuinely loved her as a daughter and who had spent 2 years living with the specific guilt of knowing he had stayed silent too long about his son's failures. Don't get up, she said, crossing to him. She took his hand. You gave everyone a very unnecessary fright. I didn't do it on purpose, Enzo said with dignity. The tomatoes, Dante said from the doorway. Were they worth it? The tomatoes were excellent, Enzo said firmly. Then he looked at his son with the expression of a man who could read the room despite recent medical events. You called her? Yes. Enzo looked at Isabella. And you came? Yes. He was quiet for a moment, his hand still in hers. You're happy, he said. Not a question. The assessment of a man who had known her face well enough to read it accurately. I am, she said. Good. He squeezed her hand once briefly. That's the whole thing, Isabella. Everything else is just... He made a small dismissive gesture with his free hand. Furniture. She laughed. Dante in the doorway watched his father hold his ex-wife's hand and heard the laugh that he had spent the past months understanding. He had failed to protect and felt something complete itself in him. Not happily. Not with relief, but with the specific and necessary closure of a wound that has finally been cleaned properly, which hurts more than the original injury, but heals true. He was going to be all right. Enzo was going to be all right, and Isabella. Isabella Romano, who had walked out of a lawyer's office 6 months ago without looking back and built something real from the wreckage of what she'd left behind. Isabella was going to be more than all right. She had already become it. Three months later, Haven opened its new wing. The ceremony was smaller than Millbrook. Margaret had no patience for speeches, but the room was full of people who mattered, the women currently in the program, the ones who had graduated and come back to witness, the donors who had made it possible, the volunteers who showed up every week without fanfare. Rosa was there in the front row with her work badge from Millbrook Community Services still clipped to her jacket because she had come directly from her shift. Diane was there with both her children, who were 9 and 11, and had the contained energy of kids who were beginning to trust that the floor was solid. The woman who had arrived with a single suitcase, her name was Patricia, and she had, in the months since obtained her GED, started a bookkeeping course and moved into her own apartment, was standing against the back wall, with the posture of someone who was not yet fully comfortable being in the center of things, but was no longer hiding from them either. Margaret stood at the front of the room and said without notes, without ceremony, "This wing exists because someone did something I've only seen a handful of times in 20 years of this work." She looked at her own life clearly enough to recognize what it was and what it wasn't, And then she did something about it. Not perfectly, not all at once, but honestly and consistently and without stopping. She paused. Isabella Romano built this. Isabella, sitting in the second row, shook her head slightly. You built it, Margaret said directly to her. Take it. Lucas beside her put his hand over hers. She stood. She looked at the room at Rosa and Diane and Patricia and Margaret, and the women she knew well, and the ones she was still learning, and the faces of people who were at various stages of the long work of reclaiming themselves. I'm not going to give a speech, she said, but I want to say one thing. She paused. Every woman in this room who is at the beginning of something, who came here with nothing or close to nothing, or with the particular exhaustion of having tried for years and run out of road. I need you to hear this from someone who has been there recently enough that it isn't theoretical. She stopped. You are not starting from zero. You are starting from everything you survived to get here. And surviving is not a small thing. It is in fact the whole foundation. The room was very quiet. That's all, she said. Welcome to the new wing. She sat down. Lucas leaned close and said very quietly, That was a speech. It was not a speech, she said. It was absolutely a speech. She was still arguing about it when Margaret called the room to order, and the real work of the day began. Tours of the new facilities, introductions, the practical and unglamorous and absolutely essential business of building something that would outlast the ceremony. Afterward, in the quiet that followed, when most people had left, Isabella stood in the new wing's common room alone for a few minutes. She looked at what had been built. She thought about the morning 6 months ago when she had sat in a lawyer's lobby and felt nothing and told herself it was peace, when actually it was the particular numbness of someone who has spent so long managing her feelings that she has become temporarily unable to locate them. She thought about the gala and the navy blue dress and the moment Lucas had said, "You look like someone deciding if this was a mistake." She thought about Enzo's hand squeezing hers in the hospital room. She thought about 4 pages of handwritten honesty delivered by courier. She thought about a photograph from a restaurant that she had not seen but knew existed, that was sitting in a drawer in a man's desk alongside the proof of who he was still deciding to become. She thought about Rosa opening every closet door in her new apartment just to prove she could. She thought about the eastern windows at Millbrook and the corner where light gathered and people followed it without knowing why. And she thought about standing in her own kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, in the weeks after the divorce, holding a coffee cup with both hands, and saying to herself in the plain and private voice that the early morning allows, "This is the last morning I will ever have to wait for Dante Valenti." She had not waited. She had built. The door opened, and Lucas came in. He stood beside her and looked at the room and didn't say anything for a moment. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. She considered the question honestly. "About how everything that was supposed to break me," she said, "turned out to be the material." He looked at her. "The material," he repeated. "For this," she said, "for all of it. The loneliness and the silence and the years of making myself smaller, I was angry about it for a long time, and then I stopped being angry and started using it. And this." She gestured at the room around her. The new wing, the walls that had been built by resources redirected from a man's reckoning, the spaces where women would come and sit and learn that they were enough to try. This is what the material made. Lucas put his arm around her. She leaned into him not as someone who needed the support to stand, but as someone who had stood alone long enough and was choosing now from a position of wholeness rather than need to lean. "Take the weekend," he said. "No expansion plans, no grant applications, no anything. Margaret told me to tell you to take the weekend," he said. "Her exact words were, 'Tell her if I see her in this building before Monday, I'm changing the locks.'" Isabella laughed. "Okay," she said. "The weekend." "There's a place 2 hours north," he said. "I designed a small retreat center up there 3 years ago. It's quiet. There's a lake. The fall light on the water is—" "Yes," she said before he finished. You didn't let me finish. Yes, she said again. He smiled. The real one, the one that reached his eyes, the one she had catalogued over months as evidence of a man who felt what he showed. Okay, he said. Pack light. We leave in the morning. She walked out with him through the Haven building she had helped build, through the door that had once held a modest sign and now held a larger one. The Isabella Romano Wing. Margaret had insisted on naming it, and Isabella had argued against it for 2 weeks and then accepted it, not from ego, but from the understanding that sometimes you let a thing be named after you. Not to take credit, but to tell the next woman who walks through the door that a real person built this. A person who was not special, or exceptional, or uniquely blessed. A person who was simply someone who kept going, and she stepped out into the November afternoon. The air was cold and clean. The city moved around her in its ordinary and extraordinary way. Somewhere across it, Dante Valenti was in his office with a photograph on his desk and a community development trust operating without his interference, and a federal matter that was closed, and a version of himself he was still day by day painstakingly constructing from the ruins of the version that had failed the most important test of his life. He was going to be all right. She knew this the way you know things about people you have loved fully, not with certainty, not with evidence you could produce in a courtroom, but with the bone-deep knowing of someone who has spent years reading another person's interior weather. He was going to be all right. And she, Isabella Romano, who had signed her name one last time as someone else's, and walked away and rebuilt herself from the first principle up, who had found her voice and her work. And a man who loved her without conditions, who had learned that forgiveness is not the same as returning, and that moving forward is not the same as forgetting, who had discovered in the most difficult year of her life that the greatest love a person can possess is the love they finally fully, unapologetically give to themselves. She was already more than all right. She was exactly who she had always been underneath everything that had been built over her. She had simply cleared the structure away. And what remained was the truest version of Isabella Romano, a woman who had survived the weight of someone else's silence, converted that weight into foundation, and built on it something that would stand long after the grief had finished its work and gone. She took Lucas's hand. She walked forward into her life, and she did not look back, not because the past did not matter, not because it had not shaped her, not because the years were not real, and the love was not real, and the loss was not real, but because looking back was no longer where she lived. She lived here, in the forward, in the chosen and the built and the real, in the life that belonged at last and completely and without condition to no one but herself.